We welcome you to the Town Hall of the National Summit on Urban Violence. Here at Chicago State University, I first would like to introduce the president of the university, Dr. Wayne Watson, to give you some greetings and welcome you to the university. Dr. Wayne Watson.
Good evening. We can never acknowledge and thank those who have the courage to have vision and the courage to bring it forth. We can never acknowledge and thank them too much. Our Congressional Black Caucus, let us applaud and acknowledge them. My mother used to always say, "Let me smell my roses while I'm here." You know, two things. One is, a question was asked earlier, what are we going to do? Are we going to come up with new money? Are we going to come up with new money to solve the problem? Chicago State University, we are stepping up, and we've stepped up for the last year now, and we have established what is called an interdisciplinary institute for urban solutions. And I now challenge universities throughout America to reprioritize your human resources, to take your tens of thousands of students and faculty that are in the different disciplines, from social work to health management, and have those students and those faculty go in the contiguous communities, work with the community organizations and activists, identify the problems, use our human resources, our curricula, our research capacity, come up with actionable strategies, and start solving the problems in our communities the way universities did at the turn of the 20th century. At Chicago State, as some of my professors state, we acknowledge physical violence as a challenge. But as Professor Harris in our African American Studies program, he talks about abstract violence. And he talks about that the detriment and the pain that we feel as a result of abstract violence far exceeds anything that one will feel from physical violence. A city, urban city, might have 200, 300, 400 people die in 1 year. Through abstract violence, meaning from redlining, from poor access to health care, from food deserts, from illiteracy, infant mortality, we have an impact, and we feel hundreds of thousands of people who are killed through abstract violence. So we must address that as well as the physical violence. So with that, I say, Congressional Black Caucus, thank you very much for bringing this to Chicago State and bringing this to the university setting. This is what universities should do. We should act and provide a vehicle for you to take your visions and make them a reality. Thank you very much, Congressional Black Caucus, and thank you for coming to the Chicago State University.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. My name is Michael SKOLNIK. I will be your moderator for this evening of this town hall. I am the political director to Russell Simmons and also the editor-in-chief of globalgrind.com, and humbly sit on the board of directors of the Trayvon Martin Foundation, which was founded by his parents, Sabrina and Tracy. Thank you. This evening and this day is about you and the incredible folks who are on this stage made a call to action for us to come together in the city of Chicago to have this conversation, this emergency summit, if you will. So the next 2 hours of this evening, we want to engage in a conversation, have a dialogue amongst those who are sitting in the audience and those who are sitting on stage. So I will speak as little as possible and just allow for a conversation to occur. There are some members of the congressional staff who have index cards that they would pass around to write questions on those index cards that we'll be taking throughout the evening. If I can for a moment, as I sat in my home in New York last night, sort of reflecting on coming to the city of Chicago, I remembered a piece that I had written 4 years ago. And if I could just read you a small portion of that piece, I would appreciate that. The line had slowly come to a halt. Stretching around the inside of the church were hundreds of people who had come to this holy place of worship to pay their respect to the life of this 16-year-old young man. On this cold, crisp autumn day in the city of Chicago, inside this old, rundown, yet beautiful cathedral, I sat 10 rows back for hours watching old people and young people, wheelchair-bound seniors, families, crying babies come and go. Stop for a moment. Some would cross themselves, others could not even look. But all at some point moved on. But then the line stopped. Someone wasn't able to move on. Someone wasn't aware that there were hundreds of people waiting in line behind her. Someone needed time. And no one said a word. We all just watched. We watched this precious, beautiful 8-year-old angel stand over her cousin's open casket and hug him like she may never see him again. We watched her father, dressed in a black t-shirt with a gold Jesus Peace medallion, stand by her side. We all just sat and watched and pretended that we weren't in the room so this child who walks with God could have her one last moment with her hero. She slowly walked down the aisle, and with tears streaming down her swollen face, I turned to witness her powerful exit. And just as she was about to exit, the young man's entire family was standing at the front doors of this Congressional Hall of God, awaiting their entrance. We rose to our feet with deep respect for their pain and their suffering, and we stood motionless as they walked down the center aisle, led by some of the most powerful men and women of faith in this nation. And now, as the mother of the 16-year-old young man had told me on the phone just 3 days prior, she could lay her baby to rest. That was the funeral of Darian Albert in 2009. I come here in memory of Darian, in memory of the thousands of young people who have been shot in this city and across this nation. I see Hadia Pendleton's mother who's with us this evening. I come here in memory of your daughter. And I come to this city with love and with gratitude for welcoming me here with open arms, but also with a personal, deep pain of the suffering that has been at the hands of mothers and fathers and family members in this city and across this country. We welcome 4 incredible people who are heroes and sheroes of mine. I'm sure many of you in this audience. Congressman Bobby Rush, Congressman Danny Davis, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and although we had a tough day 2 weeks ago, still from the great state of Florida, Congresswoman Corinne Brown. I want to ask each of you, and Congressman Rush, if you would begin, for a personal moment in your lives, and I'm sure there are many, but one that stuck with you over the years, of violence that brings you to this space and brings you to the work that you do?
Well, I have two that maybe kind of serve as bookends. The first one was on December the 4th, 1969, when 4:30 in the morning in an apartment at 2337 West Monroe, the state's attorney's police raided an apartment and murdered two members of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, shot and wounded 7 other people in the apartment that night. Then the very next morning came to my apartment and shot my door down looking for me with a so-called search warrant for weapons. They came to Fred's apartment, murdered him after they had drugged him with Seconal. So much Seconal in his body that they said it would have immobilized an elephant. December the 4th, 1969. And that night, that day, that event, that act of violence externally had a tremendous effect, and it still does in terms of the life I live, the things I do, and the reason why I do them. That's, for me, that represents an external condition, visitation of violence. An internal visitation of a condition of violence that occurred to me was when my 29-year-old son was shot down by some young black men on the south side of Chicago in 1999. And although I was in the Congress, that stirred up something in me that motivated me then, and still motivates me to continue to try to work, to do all that I can, to not only, to do all that I can in every way that I can, in the Congress, in the community, in the church, to try to deal with some of the prevailing issues of young people, the violence in our communities. And it really, that episode of violence is really what drove me into the ministry and made me look more closely at my faith and rely more on my faith. So it was those two instances. December the 4th, 1969, and October the 30th, 1999. The violence that I experienced then is probably, they've been most pivotal in terms of my own experience. Let me just say this to you, and I know we want to move on. I remember my wife calling me and said that Huey had been shot. I was at the ward office, the second ward office. So I immediately got in the car and drove out to Christ Hospital. the operating room or in the waiting room, they were operating on my son. The doctor said, well, the operation was successful. It looks like he might pull through. At the time, I was on a conference committee in the Congress. We were a very important bill that we were working on. So when the doctor told me that he was doing all right, it seemed like he was going to pull it through. I said, well, I'm going to go back to Congress and spend the next couple of days there, and then I'll come back to Chicago. Well, when I went back that morning, by that evening, I was at my apartment in Washington, and I got a call that Huey had taken a turn for the worse, and that I need to get back. So I called the first flight out the very next morning, came to Chicago, and went into the room where all these tubes, and he had swollen up so big it was hardly recognizable. And after about an hour or so, he made his transit. He had passed on. The reason why I say that is because his sister, his mother, when the doctor said that pronounced him dead, I never will forget that primal scream I hear today. That primal scream that only can come from a mother. Only can come from a mother. You know? That scream that I couldn't even repeat. It comes from the deepest part of a human being, of a mother. I never forget that primal scream. And I just don't know whether or not there are enough of us who don't, especially our young people, who don't know what it means when you take a life, who don't really, you know, I think that the media and the movies and the mass communication, telecommunication, they've kind of created this homogenized idea of what that really means. You know, but that primal scream that comes from a mother is a force of nature that you can't ever forget, and you should not ever forget. And I think that really is part of what I want to be a part of, what I'm doing and what I would like to do. I don't want to hear that scream coming from no other mother in our community, that primal scream, you know.
Wow, well, thank you for sharing that, Congressman. Congressman Davis.
In the central city area of Chicago since 1961. When I came here as a 19-year-old after having graduated from college. And I've spent the rest of my adult life living in what would be called the west side of the city, in the Lawndale, the East and West Garfield, and the Austin communities. I taught school in the Chicago public school system for 6 years before deciding to do some other things. During that time, 8 of my students were killed. During that same period of time, 6 of my students killed other people. It was nothing unusual for a fellow named Frank Lipscomb and I to go to court with the young person who did the shooting in the morning and the family of the person who was killed. We'd go to their funerals in the evening. And so I've seen a tremendous amount of violence. One of the most graphic was the young fellow called Yummy, who was dropped out of a public housing high-rise. And it just happened that a woman who works with me today, she and her husband owned the funeral home at the time, Sharita Logan. And I went to the funeral home to view this little boy, crumpled, and this was before time for the funeral. Just a little mass of humanity, crumpled on a table. And that, to me, became one of the most graphic and pathetic scenes that I have experienced. But what really brings me here this evening is a realization that there are those of us who've had individual tragedies. And then there are those whose tragedies have not been as individualized. In that respect, I have been fortunate. But I can tell you, when my brother feels pain, I hurt. I can tell you that when I hear of an individual, we've heard a great deal about Idea Pendleton. They had played for us in the Ways and Means committee room while they were in Washington. And so I'd had the experience of watching the students from this school spend a couple of hours with us while they were waiting to do something else. And I thought of how gracious they were, how talented they were, how talented their teachers and the adults who were chaperoning them. And to think that some of them would not have the opportunity to keep displaying who they were because their lives had been taken away by senseless violence. I can never forget those two incidents, and I never will. And those are the things that are in my mind as I come here this evening for the continuation of the last day that we have experienced happenings in our community.
Thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman Kelly.
My work as a counselor involved me with child abuse and domestic violence, and that was really my entree into the world of violence. But then personally, in 2004, I lost first a cousin, 31 years old. She was murdered by her husband. She was a neurosurgeon, and he stabbed her over 50 times while she was sleeping. And then just within the next 3 months, one of my volunteers was shot in the head by her husband, and then he killed himself all in front of an 8-year-old. That's my personal experience, but why I'm here today is because of the Blair Holts and the Idea Pendletons and the Darian Alberts and the Ben Wilsons, because we're losing a generation of young people and we cannot afford to do it. And I know there are, and hopefully people have discussed them, and we're going to hear about them tonight, that there are solutions to this because we can't afford to lose anybody else. And as Congressman Rush said, we don't want any more parents crying, and it's something I've never experienced, but I know from my aunt, my cousin has been dead 9 years, and the pain is still not going away.
Thank you for sharing. Congresswoman Brown.
Thank you, and I want to thank Congressman Bobby Worth and Davis and Kelly for letting me be here with you tonight. And I want to tell you, you all look really good. I am so happy that I caught a plane 5 o'clock this morning to be here from Florida. I've been elected 30 years, but in my real life, I used to be a counselor. And I will never forget when the police came to see me about one of my students. And he wanted the student to testify against her husband. And so I couldn't understand what was the problem. Well, she had twins, a girl and boy, and they were 5 years old, and the father had raped both of them. And I'm talking to the mother, and she said, well, what will I be able to do without him? And I said, what have black women have always had to do? They are the backbone of the family, and they have to stand up. And I've got to tell you, one of the hardest jobs I've had in Congress is to talk to Trayvon Martin's mother, to talk to Davis, who is a young black guy that got shot up in the car for playing his music too loud. But the story that is the Alexander story that I told you about earlier, where this black woman shot a warning shot, got 20 years from an abusive husband. But that's not the whole story. I went to the sentencing and I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting up there and it was not a dry eye there. I could not stop crying because 4 black women came and testified why she should not go to jail. And each one of them had a child from this abusive man, and he beat every last one of them. And they were beautiful, attractive women. And I'm saying, we need something else. We need sister to sister. We need to work together to make sure this does not have this kind of abusive going on in our community. And I want to give the women in this audience a hand. Strong black women. We've got to do our part.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Brown. That actually is a perfect segue. Marissa Alexander is the story she is speaking of. Who was sentenced to 20 years under Stand Your Ground. She said she was standing her ground, and the jury found her guilty because there's 2 kids in the house. They gave her 20 years.
The jury found her guilty in 12 minutes.
That's right.
And 12 minutes, they came back with the verdict. The day, if it's a Stand Your Ground case now in the country, this is it. There was a restraining order against the husband that day. He had beat her when she was 6 months pregnant and put her in the hospital. So if it's a stand your ground, this is stand your ground.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that story because it's an important one. I want to welcome the great Congresswoman of Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee, who has just joined us. I would assume from an airplane somewhere in an airport. Thank you, Congresswoman, for being here. I'm going to ask you to absorb all this first, and then I will happily ask you a few questions. So as Congresswoman Brown talked about domestic violence, and we had, for those who weren't here today, we had 4 amazing breakout sessions, really inspiring breakout sessions. And for those who did participate, we thank you for participating. We're going to have some reports back from those breakout sessions about some of the solutions that some of you all came up with during that breakout session. I see our friend, our 9-year-old friend, who was the youngest member of our group. I'm glad you're still with us and still awake. So thank you for coming. The first breakout session I'm going to call up is the leader from domestic violence.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, family. I am Marian Perkins and chairperson of the Criminal Justice, Political Science, and Philosophy Department at Chicago State University. I am also the founder of the Cook County Bar Association Expungement Project. So I look at a lot of people, and they've seen me at the expungement summits. And I'm also a former prosecutor. Shout out to the victims and the offenders. We know we're all family. And I'd like to honor all of the lovely, respected Congresspeople, Congressman Bobby Rush, Danny Davis, the Honorable Robin Kelly, Honorable Corinne Brown, and the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. It is an honor and privilege for me to stand before you all, and I thank Dr. Watson. I'd like to say we had a very, very good session on domestic violence, and I'll tell you just briefly what we came up with. The first thing we looked at were issues and then solutions. The issue is that domestic violence is the precursor to youth violence and gang violence. So when we were trying to define the situation, there was a discussion that domestic violence is a learned behavior, and we talk about it as early as from birth to age 7. So when we're looking at solutions, we can't emphasize enough education for the parents and education for the children. Also, when you hear the Congresswoman Brown talk about domestic violence of a pregnant woman, no less, we want to have no domestic violence at all, but that is sometimes one of the most difficult, most dangerous times, unfortunately, for women when they are pregnant. So we must educate our community and make sure that as we hear about what we think are the flashy topics of youth, gangs, violence, that we remember that all of them were little, beautiful, each one of the children beautiful. We don't have to be a Latin scholar, Latin for tabula rasa, a blank slate. So take that too, you know, this is a university, so take your tabula rasa is Latin for a blank slate. So when you have a blank slate, people don't just become, at age 15, the violent people that they have become. It is a learned behavior. And the other thing too we want to say, we want to support the parents. Now, so in terms of the action plan, I see our Congresswoman Kelly taking notes. I know everyone's taking notes, but it certainly in terms of early childhood education and money for parenting classes is extremely important. One last thing, I'd like to commend the male members of our group. I don't know what happened. I don't know, it just, by the time it was over, we all held hands. We were in a peace circle. Some of the men came forward, and you know what they said? I was a batterer. I did it. And they said that, they said I'm sorry to us, who they didn't even know, and they said that they were sorry to the person who they had hit, that one particular individual, but they also said that they were sorry to all of us. And you know what else we said? We said, we accept your apology because you have come out to do that. So the point that I'm making is many of the men talked about that they need help. They need help with how to guide their behavior. And we said, listen, you're willing to come more than halfway, we're willing to meet you. Now, certainly I'm a former prosecutor and not making light of it. We know that there are times, absolutely, there has to be prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. I know how to fully, vigorously prosecute a case. Off the record, they did not vigorously prosecute that Trayvon Martin case, okay? I'll just say that. That's just a little personal aside. You do not bring in the defendant's statements into the trial. What you do is you humanize your victim, one, and then you just lay out your case. But you don't bring in the defendant's statements into the stage trial thinking you can make the defendant testify. You can't make the defendant testify or use a technique like that. That's not a good technique, but I digress. But anyway, to come back to the domestic violence issues on a very serious note, information, and that we realize when we talk about gang violence, when we talk about gun violence, when we talk about all of the violence, it is starting at home. Please don't forget domestic violence. It is an extremely important issue that must be considered. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We will next hear from the group leader of gang violence.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Sharon LATIKER, and I'm the CEO of Labor of Love Performing Arts Academy, and also a member of the community that we all live in. My subject was, or our subject I facilitated in gangs, and we kind of had a good time. Congressman Danny Davis was there, and we went a little bit off. We got into gangs, we got into ex-offenders, we got into a lot of stuff. So we think we covered it all. But when we talk about gangs, we said, why are young black kids involved in gang activities? And that's the why question. Why are they involved? And out of everything that was said in the sessions, one young man got up in the back, one of our youth, and he said, it's not that we want to do it, we don't have anything to do. You talk about us hanging on the corners, but you've closed the community centers. So where do you want us to go? We don't have any place to go. So we congregate on the corners, and they're closing the schools as well. And as the young man was talking, I was sitting there as an educator, looking back, and we talk about the prison pipeline, and we talk about gangs, where do they start? They're looking at our children in the 3rd grade. Someone said the 4th grade, but it's really the 3rd grade. If our children can't read and write, they're basing those funds upon our children that cannot read and write based upon how much they're going to spend on the prison system. And what do we do as a community to stop this? My philosophy is a child cannot be what a child cannot see. You'll get that tomorrow. But if a child can't see it, he can't be it. The parent is the first teacher, not mean that the parent is always the best teacher. Because if the parent doesn't know any better, how can the parent teach the child to do any better? So that's where the community comes in at. And we always say it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to save one. And as the community, we have to step up. And as we grew up in our community, we had big mamas on the block. And you couldn't curse, you couldn't stay out, you couldn't do a lot of things because big mama would tell on you. Big mama would whoop you, and then you would get a whooping once you got home. Now, we're afraid to even discipline our children. We can't discipline our children, we can't do any of that. So we talk about gangs. Why do our children get involved in gangs? Because of love, someone said. So we as a community, if they're not receiving that at home, we have to give that to them. That's why we need the funding. We talked about programs. We need to stop throwing all of our money behind bad programs. We have good programs that are working. If it's working, let's put our money behind those programs that are working. So why do our children get involved in gangs? Number one, they have nothing to do. But I come and I do a challenge on today as a community leader, community activist. What are we going to do? I'm tired of sitting around the table, and that's all we do is sit around the table. What do we do after we write down our ideas and get all of our information? Where do we go from here? We get charged up. We leave out of here. What do we do? Absolutely nothing. Someone has to make a conscious decision within themselves to say, I'm going to do something differently, and I'm going to take a child on my block in my community, and I'm going to mentor this child. Does mentoring work? Yes, it does. If I can't mentor the child, then let me mentor the parent. I ran a school, an alternative school. They told me I would never get my parents to come to a parent meeting on a Saturday. I said, yes, I will. Downtown Chicago, I had every gang there was represented in my school. But they knew when they came to the school, they was not having that because you came to Dr. LATIKER's house. And you had the 3 C's. You had choices, chances, and consequences. You made the choice to do what you did. The chance was you get caught. Now the consequences is that you had to come to my school. My school have rules, and you're not gonna run me. And that's just the way I ran my school. I didn't have it. And we ran a very successful alternative school under HRDI, under the late Dr. Vince Bateman. To say that is, we have to put some rules in place, some systems in place, and if we as adults stand up and put those systems in place, the children will follow. All our children are looking for is some guidance and some leaders to just stand up and tell me no. Stop saying yes all the time to our children. No is not a bad word. So I think if we begin to look back on what we were raised on and how the values and the morals that we had, we need to start implementing those right into our children, and guess what? We'll have a better community, we'll have a better country, we'll have a better nation, and we will not have the violence that we have in our city. Chicago will not be on the news all over these United States of America because of the crime that we have. Let's turn these things around. Let's put our faith together. We have religious leaders of all communities. Come on and put it together. One Lord, one faith, and one baptism. Come on and get it together and come together as a community as a whole.
Sunday's coming up soon. Next, we'll hear from gun violence.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Audra Wilson. I'm the District Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and I have the pleasure of co-moderating along with Michael Skolnik for gun violence. So essentially, a summary from our group was that people were either speaking from their personal experiences, having lost multiple members of their family to gun violence, or they themselves having gotten up into a gun culture and a violent lifestyle and telling about their personal stories. The overarching theme from our group was that violence is actually a symptom of a much larger problem, or a series of problems. Some of the problems we identified were hopelessness, lack of connection to history, so people not understanding where they come from and the legacy of greatness of our communities, the lack of economic opportunities, glorification of violence and guns. We also had a discussion about abstract violence, so not literally shooting people, but what's happening with redlining, the foreclosure crisis, vacant lots, school closures, economic disinvestment, all things that create an environment that are ripe for violence. We also talked about the lack of community or loss of community and community parenting. And we even talked about some barriers for ex-offenders' reentry into our communities. So for solutions, the recurring theme was education, multiple levels of education, short-term with mentoring and reconnection to communities. And we had several people give examples of some of the ways that they were mentoring youth, mentoring other folks in the community. We also talked about long-term solutions, including legislative action and education in a broader sense, investing in education, investment in our schools, and reinvestment in our community. Another theme that came up was parenting and the importance for us to be better parents to our children, and again, part of that community parenting theme. But once again, this group recognized that it's going to take a multifaceted solution for a multifaceted problem. And once again, that violence is simply a symptom of the larger problems that were affecting our community.
And the last breakout session from today was youth violence.
Good evening. Good evening. We had youth violence. Youth violence is, I like to say seriously though, when we contextualize this, we need to do a certain thing. And although we've tried to layer these things, one thing we addressed at the very beginning of our session was violence to some degree is interconnected, like disciplines are interdisciplinary. So you almost can't talk about one without talking about the other. So when we're talking about youth violence, it's not the closure of 50 schools violent. It's not the poverty that a lot of our children in violent. So when we're talking about this issue of violence, the first thing we had to do in our group was to kind of contextualize what it meant to endure youth violence. Dr. King said you can legislate policy, but you can't legislate attitudes. He went on to remix that version, and he said something like, we can't have a paralysis of analysis. And so what we did in our group was we tried to kind of satisfy this reality of bringing some resolve. And we talked about the problematic component, but we also talked about the solutions. I'm sorry, my name is Dr. Chandra Gill. You may know me from the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I am also the CEO of Black Academically Speaking. I believe to educate our kids, you simply got to motivate them. Ain't nothing hard about this. You just got to care about people. You got to love them, and you got to motivate them and inspire them, understanding where they are. When we came back to our group, what I loved about our group, Congressman, and to all of the people who are daring and caring to listen to us today, what we decided was, seriously, there were a few things that we thought needed immediate attention when we talk about our youth. We first had our youth to be involved and engaged. They themselves gave some things that we thought were very instrumental and integral, right, Zakia? Integral to this thing we're talking about. President Obama signed an executive order for the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. We're not just talking to our congressional figures. We have a very empirical question that is worthy of analysis and can give us some resolve in return. What is that question? What happened? The executive order was signed. We just would like to know what happened, because the resources that people will argue for, jobs, better education, opportunity and access, equity versus equality, we can talk all of that, but at the end of the day, when we present something for African Americans, we need to see it through, and we need the resources to come back to the community, to people who are impacted by these issues every day. So very simply, we tried to funnel this thing. White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. The president signed the executive order almost 1 year ago today. Where is it? What has happened, and what are we doing? The other thing was the urban policy perspective. This was something that the president argued for about 4 or 5 years ago. We've talked about these things, we've built these things, we've just not put the things in the building that would help the building to function like this building does every day. We're simply asking our congressional body, where are we with these things? And then we talked about, for solution as I exit, the real pieces are, seriously, how can we institute the reality of children knowing who they are? This is not a hard question. When we look at our textbooks, it's something that's very serious that can be argued from a federal perspective. We have to come up with the reality of understanding that as people are saying we want to talk about slavery or whatever else that impacts African Americans from a curriculum standpoint, we have to have a rebuttal to that. History is history whether you like it or not. Our children need to know who they are, how they are, what they became, and how they became. I guarantee you, as our group so fundamentally said, if you teach people who they really are, like I say, I don't have to teach brothers how to pull up their pants. If I teach them who they are and how to think, they'll pull them up themselves. That's our group. I love y'all tremendously.
Wow. Well, I am going to go home now. I'm gonna change the rules a little bit, and I might get in trouble, but I think it's the right thing to do. I had some questions that I was gonna ask, but I'm gonna throw those out. I got a stack of note cards from you all, and keep writing if you have more. Folks, I will definitely get an answer, absolutely. But what I'm going to do is I am going to read the question, and I ask who wrote the question to raise your hand, and I will come to you with a microphone so there can be a conversation. All that I ask, and I think all that we ask, is even in disagreement, let's have a civil conversation. So even if we disagree with each other, this is an evening for us. I will hold the microphone. Please don't take it out of my hands. And I will certainly want the folks who wrote the questions have a chance to respond to the answers. So to the question of the doctor who just asked on President Obama's executive order, does someone want to take that question and do we know where we are with that executive order?
Well, let me say, I don't know specifically. You know, there are 3 branches of government. The executive branch, they do what they do. And the president issued the executive order, and the last I heard about this particular commission, they are meeting, they are having workshop, or not workshop, but they're having interdepartmental meetings. They're looking at the issue. They've had people from all across the country to come in to discuss this particular aspect, the education of young black males, but they haven't come up with any legislative initiatives. And once they come up with legislative initiatives, then that's when the Congress, we get involved.
So if I can't,
I'll just add to it. I chair the Congressional Black Caucus's task force on education. David Johns, who is the executive director, was with us day before yesterday when we rolled out the caucus, the Congressional Caucus, on African American men and boys, and he actually gave a litany of initiatives and proposals that he and the advisors who advise him, and that is a committee that has been appointed by the president to do so, have put on paper that they're now in the process of beginning to implement. And so it's moving. It hasn't been in existence long enough to have produced results, but it does in fact exist. It is moving. It has an executive director. It has an advisory group, and it's moving.
Congressman, do you want to add to that?
If I might.
Please.
If I might stand up for a moment.
Certainly.
So that I can at least thank my colleagues for doing this. I am daring and I'm caring, to answer the sister's point, because I came to Chicago because of Congressman Bobby Rush, Congressman Danny Davis, and Congressman Robin Kelly. I may be a little late on this, but can you give them a hand? Did you just do me that favor? And I just want to take a moment to say some things that build on what excellent sessions we've had. One of the things that we have to do is to wear a banner. Maybe we have to wear a billboard. We too are America. Maybe we have to reintroduce ourselves to America and tell people that we're going to stop accepting, acquiescing, and letting you have a second chance. Because the work is done, and we make up the Congressional Black Caucus. Your members represent you here in Chicago, but they make up the body politic of Congress, but in particular, the Congressional Black Caucus. And the question that I ask is that while we are putting together an enormously important agenda, in fact, I want to credit these three members because we need to get on the road. Because if I were to show you these numbers and tell you that the brilliance of what they have done, we need to get on the road. Because in gun injuries that you've already heard, if I can just give you these numbers, these are 08 and 09, 34,387 children and teens suffered non-fatal gun injuries. 26,225 were injured in gun assaults, and 13,471 were black. Those numbers are probably going up 51%. So in essence, who has been listening? Your members have, but policy goes local, state, and federal. And what we're facing in Washington, I didn't want to just come in and not let you know that when they're fighting, when we're putting policies together, we're dealing with something crazy called sequester. So an executive order was passed, and if you're cutting into the resources for no reason, we got to say we too are America. Our children deserve. When we try to pass legitimate basis of dealing with children, from what I heard, intervention, jobs, alternative schools, we have a money crisis. So I'm going to engage with some of these questions, but I hope that I can sort of pinch you to say, we got to link arms to do this as a whole body. Because I'm not saying it's only money. I've heard some wonderful things. One of the greatest tragedies I had is a friend of a friend had her cousin and her cousin's daughter shot by a domestic abuser who had been taken to court, and I don't single out man versus woman, but to show you, taken to court, got mad that he was taken to court, just let out, even though she had a restraining order, went home and got a gun, and shot the wife and her daughter. 2 caskets in the church. So we know we have a problem with gun violence, but we've got to be able to address intervention, whether it is an abuser, whether it's someone who has been abused, whether it's a child in gangs, whether it is someone who is involved in criminal activity. We got to get in the middle of it. And there's no shame to say that resources are needed. So I'm hoping that when we get through here, we don't run away from where's the money. And why can't we get money that is balanced and looks to the cure? I'm not saying waste money. Oh, you know, they like to say you had that Model Cities program, you wasted money. You had that jobs program, you wasted money. I can show you people who benefited from those programs. I can show you people who made a difference in their lives because they had a summer job, or they were in the Model Cities program, or the Great Society, or then maybe they got Medicare. I'm not off the point. I just want to frame us, because I think one of the things that the members battle every day is the non-understanding that we are America. And when our boats are lifted, when our children are not being shot, when they're in a classroom, then all boats are lifted. So I just leave you with this point. And I don't know if my friends have said it, but I sure hope that you all will come with whatever agenda you may have, at least in one spot that's in August. And that is August 24th, the March on Washington. We need to have a lot of issues being raised, and you do it, you have your sign, and I'm not saying marching is an answer, but remember how I started out. Started out by saying, is anybody listening? Because you have ideas. You have members of Congress who are more than excellent, crafting legislation, seeking opportunity, trying to give back. Right now, I'll just sit on my seat and say, where's the summer youth job program that we all been fighting for? We had one in 2009, then came the big money cutting. And so I think that when we end on tonight, weaving in and out of these excellent suggestions, and hopefully we'll have answers to some of your questions. The President faces the same uphill battle. The executive order was signed a year ago, and we don't have a budget today. We don't want to throw stones. We want to ask the broader politics, do you recognize that we too are America? So I am looking forward to getting in the mix and getting you further energized as you've already been, but I want you to keep that in mind so you won't say, well, what are they doing? Why are they not doing anything? My God, I can tell you. We go to bed doing something. We hanging on in the dark of night trying to do something. But we've got to turn America around to recognizing that when you deal with these issues, you are loving America, you are building America, and we should not take second-class status, second-class citizenship to say that our issues should be pushed back and others should be pushed forward. I thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I am going to come down into the audience. I'm looking for Teresa V. Smith. So Teresa V. Smith, please raise your hand. Please come down to the front, please. Teresa's question, members of Congress, is, and I think I'm getting a lot of these questions. You heard some solutions here tonight. How do you intend to work with established groups that have vision for helping young people to have an economic base for money for many years? How do you intend to work with established groups that have a vision for helping young people to have an economic base for many years? So you hear solutions this evening from many folks in the audience and from on stage. How does the Congressional Black Caucus intend to work with those groups, or how are you already working with those groups? And here's Teresa, and you can respond to her. I'm going to hold the mic just in case you're going to stand right here. This is Teresa Smith.
Yes. I'm asking that question because we always hear the term in unity, there's strength. But if you don't have anyone listening to you, you can't have strength. So what I'm asking is that for you to look at the established groups that have been already working, such as Reverend Al Sampson, who is a visionary, a civil rights worker, and he has had a Black Tradesmen's Council, he has had a farmer's market, he has heirloom seeds. He's been working so hard with the food desert, as you mentioned, and we need to get rid of the division where everyone is doing their own thing and we need to come together and find out where these things are happening. Because being a former educator, and I was an educator, I was a principal of Woodline Prep Alternative High School, and in that classroom, we had 16 up to seniors. And if you don't listen to the wisdom that's there among all people, okay, you're not going to accomplish anything. So in that classroom, we listen to the wisdom of the young people, and we listen to the wisdom of the older people, and it's a each one teach one environment.
I think that's why I'm so happy that there's all age people here, because we wanted to hear from the people on the ground, from the people experience all the things that are going on, but importantly, I know I feel like I wanted to hear from the people that are doing things, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good things going on now, and I want to know how we can further support.
Speaking, yeah, there you go.
What I'm saying, I'm so glad there are all age people here, because we need to. Here's my mic. I don't know.
You want to come here, Congressman?
But I'm so glad there are all age people here, and there were all ages earlier, because we want to hear from everybody. Everybody has ideas and suggestions, and you're the ones living in the community, and you can come and tell us what you think will work. And the other thing is, I was hoping that people that are involved in good things have shared those, because I don't think we need to keep reinventing the wheel. We need to support the good things that are going on in Chicago now, and there are a lot of good things, but we're not connecting with each other, so sometimes we don't even know the good things going on. And I think that we need to give resources, and it may be people, money, I'm not sure what everybody needs to help further those programs and to expand those programs, duplicate those programs. And what's already been mentioned, we want to take this show on the road. We want to go to New Orleans and Baltimore and other places. It's just not in Chicago these things are occurring. And so, I mean, the plan when we leave here, we're going back to the rest of the caucus to let them know what went on here, and you will hear from us. We are committed to you hearing from us, but also we want to keep hearing from you. We need each other. We can't do it alone, and we want to help you.
Thank you.
Yes. I want to thank you for that, and it's also an established group. It's the 1570 Club, which is 1570 AM by Harold Davis, and we're working with that too. And so those are two established actionary groups that's happening in Chicago right now.
Thank you so much. I'm looking for Mr. Noel Green. Mr. Noel Green, right here. Mr. Green's question: at the root of these violence issues within our communities is local economic crisis. How will each of you, Illinois congresspeople and the great Congresswoman from Texas, work to foster the transformation of our economic plight of our communities into a destiny of economic vitality? Mr. Noel Green, the Executive Director of E Squared Business Development Fund. E Cubed, excuse me.
Well, I guess we do it in many different ways. I'm one who believes I have 20 advisory groups that I work with in my congressional district, ranging from everything early childhood development to business and economic development. We meet regularly. Some of them meet every month. Some meet every other month. Some meet twice a month. We are engaged all the time. And some of us are even almost as old as Al Sampson, but we've been working with Rep. Sampson for a long time. And so we're actually engaged with the kind of activity. Anybody can join our groups. All you got to do is give us a call at 773-533-7520. Most of the legislation...
Say that one more time, Congressman.
773-533-7520. Most of the legislation that we have gotten passed originated with our groups meeting. One is the $5 million that people have gotten who have HIV, AIDS organizations whose budgets are less than $100,000 a year, and the money comes from a lottery scratch-off. That came from one of our town hall meetings. That's where the idea was generated. The Second Chance Act was generated at one of our town hall meetings. That's where it came from. So we're engaged in the ways that you're talking about, and we do it with consistency and regularity.
I'm committed to working with small business. God, what is wrong? I'm very committed to working with small business because it's really small business that's the backbone of this country. And what someone said earlier, if you have a small business in the neighborhood, you're probably going to hire the neighborhood person. I'm also committed to keeping government's feet to the fire. When there's a local hometown project, we need to hire the local hometown residents, contractors, minority businesses, and women businesses. That is not done enough. And I've met with various people to ensure that that is going to happen, asking for reports. Also, I'm on science, space, and technology, and we just had a STEM meeting with various universities in my district and entrepreneurs, and actually one of the public schools, because the thing that's happening, there's job openings, but what we keep hearing from the Ford plant, from other manufacturing plants, they can't find enough skilled workers. So I want to make sure we turn the unskilled workers into skilled workers, and we can do that through the community college. You don't have to have a college education. You don't have to have a 4-year degree, but you need certifications because manufacturing is not what it used to be. The other thing I'm committed to is trying to find businesses to adopt our local high schools, or even junior high schools, so that we can build into the curricula the skills that are needed to get the jobs that are the jobs of the future, because it's not what it used to be and things are different.
Congressman Rush, you want to comment on that?
I want to say we have some roles that we play as legislators. And one of the roles, I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, one of the oldest and powerful committees in the Congress. And I'm a senior member of that committee, and I am the leading Democrat on the subcommittee on energy and power. And as part of my day-to-day work as a member of Congress, I have energy companies coming before the committee and coming before a meeting with me in my office because they have particular concerns and issues. And so I have the responsibility, and I assume the responsibility courageously and enthusiastically of making sure that every energy company that I'm in contact with, whatever their initiative is, that they have provisions for minority participation, ownership contracts. I had the head of the American Gas Association, Pipeline Association, the American Pipeline Association. This was about 6 months ago. Came to them before the committee. I asked him, because I'm the only black on the subcommittee, or I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee, I asked him how many minorities was in his association. All right? And the guy couldn't answer that. He never had a question like that asked of him by a member of Congress. He turned beet red, all right, because he didn't have the answer. And he told me he would get back to me, which I knew the answer before I asked him. But, so the point that I'm making is that there is leverage. If you have the conscious, there's leverage to make sure that African Americans are included in the discussion, in the consciousness of some of these major corporations, and that they aggressively and affirmatively go out and help either expand or help create black businesses. And we've had a lot of success along those lines. But that's not the only thing that you can do, because you're in a position of influence. And so I had to take off my hat as being the leading Democrat or the ranking member on Congress, all right? And CORRINE came and told me, Congressman, that they are trying to take your money out of Illinois and put it someplace else. That's got me focused on the whole Metro Create program. And so we had to get that money refocused and rechanneled and protect that money. Now, once we protected that money, then I found out, and when I was told this, that out of $93 million that the one black firm, a security contract, was let for one black security firm, one black contract, out of $93,412,000. So I had to take off my hat as a, right, my congressional had to put my tam on, all right? And we had to march on Metro, all right? So, you know, you kind of live with you have some dualities that you're dealing with. We got to be leaders before we're legislators. And leaders got to do what leaders do. So whenever there's an opportunity to create some businesses, whenever there's an opportunity to leverage some activity, whenever there's an opportunity to raise the specter of helping individuals, then you have to rise up to that occasion. We don't have the luxury. You know, if it requires us to march, then we march. If it requires us, let me just tell you another example here. And some people, the media is trying to be critical of me on this, all right? They're trying to create some kind of spectacle or some type of controversy about this, all right? Comcast, I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We got jurisdiction over telecommunications. Comcast was trying to buy NBC. Okay, so Comcast needed my support, other members' support of the CBC. Well, I told them, the Comcast folk, if you want to get my support and on this, then you're going to have to create black-owned television stations. I had a hearing here in Chicago, all right? Well, the subcommittee here in Chicago. And Comcast, in order to get the support, they in fact created, and they signed a memorandum of agreement, they created, like Puff Daddy got a television station, Magic Johnson got a television station, all right? That's where Aspire and Puff's television station come. So it creates those kinds of businesses and creates that kind of opportunity that have a real effect on blacks, not just in Chicago, but across the city. So we are doing, I mean, I don't want to see this though, if we could. I kind of see this going a certain way. I don't want this to turn into, well, you all are holding the members of the CBC feet to the fire, because that's a waste of your time. Because our feet is always, all the time, held to the fire. You're wasting time asking us about our commitment. You ought to know about what needs to happen. We need to stay on point and try to deal with the issue and the agenda upon which we were called. We were called here to talk about solutions to the violence.
So, Congressman, let me ask you this then. Let me move to the next question. I have a question from Bren Martin from the National PTA. And this summit is called the National Emergency Summit. And Congressman Kelly, you spoke about this morning, the July 4th weekend here in Chicago, that was enough. And this question from Ms. Martin is about an immediate intervention. What immediate intervention do you suggest or would you support to help to protect our children today and tomorrow while we provide the long-term interventions of jobs, education, parenting classes, etc.? We must protect our children to school, from work, and at home. Example, would you recommend military protection? So immediate intervention, it's an emergency summit. What immediate intervention would you suggest or support today from Ms. Martin?
Anybody go? Well, I'll tell you what I suggest. Every block should have a block club. Every block should have a block club. You see, problems start at the local level, and it takes local interaction to deal with them. Some of the most exciting times I've had in life was when I was a block club organizer, because people themselves hold many of the solutions to whatever it is that they call problems. And then you move from one level to the next, and from that level to the next. For every issue, there's not necessarily a great legislative remedy. Many legislative efforts take 5 to 10 years, even when you get them passed. I'm saying, even when you work on an idea that you've put into a proposal to become a bill, it may take 5, it may take 10 years before you get that passed. But there are always things that individuals can do right where they are, right in their communities, right in their neighborhoods, and you can't always be looking out there somewhere for the solutions that can be found right here.
If I could just add, I wish those young men had not walked out. Because I know I can understand why they did. Because here we are, they have some issues right in front of them, right here, right now. And that's fear of being killed, all right? And what we are focused on right now, for the most part, is adult problems. We have walked right beyond the problems that our children are having. And we're not talking to them. We got some still in the room. We're talking about adult issues. Why I didn't get a contract? Why I can't get money for my business? Why I can't get and we're walking right past these children, and therefore, when we leave here, unless we switch the agenda back to the reason why the emergency part of this summit, and start talking about our children, all right, and what we gonna do now and tomorrow about the killings that are taking place as we sit in this room, then we have missed the boat, because adults have the capacity and the selfishness, the self-interest to look beyond the problem of the children and focus in on their issues and leave the issues of the children laying on this and expect them to solve their problems. Children cannot solve the children's problem, because really the children's problem is the insensitivity and the callousness of the adults who say that they love them. You got children on your mind, but you don't have them in your heart. You got to have children in your heart. And right now, I'm reaching a level of frustration. Let's talk about the children.
Well, Congressman Rush, the next question, I have a 9-year-old young man named Jermaine Young.
Lord.
Michael, let me just add something.
Sure, please. And while you're answering, Congressman, can Jermaine Young find me, please?
Let me say that that one of the answers is that we must use the word emergency. One of the emergencies is the flow of guns. One of the ideas could be a national emergency response to gun trafficking. Gun shootings range from Chicago to Washington to the West Coast, the East Coast, the South, and the North. We left Washington, they were burying 2 teenagers, a brother and a sister that had been shot dead in the streets. You go to my hometown, you can find the same things, but what are they using? Guns that are coming in. So one of the things that can be done on a national level is to stop the flow of guns and to stop getting in the hands of whether it's gangs, whether it's somebody that wants to perpetrate a crime against you walking down the street, whether it's somebody who wants to go into a grocery store. You've got to stop the flow of guns. And that's one of the things we can take back to Washington, because there are jurisdictions like yours that have good gun laws, but guns are flowing in because there are no restraints of who can traffic guns, because there are restraints put on the investigation by those who don't want to fund a crisis, which is the flow of guns. We can all speak in one voice: stop the illegal flow of guns getting into our children's hands and causing them to kill or them to be killed. Stop the flow of guns.
Thank you, Congressman. We are looking for the 9-year-old young man, but in the meantime, I will ask his question to the 4 of you. He asked Jermaine Young, his question was, why do you all still assume that gang violence is from young youth gang banging? Why do you all still assume that gang violence is from young youth gang banging?
Well, I heard something quite interesting today, and that's why I really want to listen to the young people, because I think that those of my generation and maybe those of other generations, I don't know, but I think that we're really missing the boat here. I was paid on the Danny's breakout session on gang violence, and the young man, one of the young guys that walked out, said that, you know, your definition of gangs has changed. So you're using the 1990 definition of gangs. You say in the 90s, these gangs were more drug control. They were more drug directed. I said, but that's not it anymore. Now it's more turf directed. It's more turf driven. Now, if we don't get that, then we're going to be following the media, and it's talking about gangs who are dealing drugs, and miss the boat about the gangs who are killing because of turf. Now, when I heard that, the first thing that came to my mind, because, you know, the Spirit has been working with me on this, I'm thinking about CHA here in Chicago. And the forced migration of 40,000 families out of public housing. A public policy issue. Taking them, we all admit, poor housing, deteriorating housing. Right, absolutely. We admit that the worst kind of housing you could ever want to live in, warehouses. But the effect of tearing them all down at the same time, pushing them into Chatham and pushing them into West Chesterfield and pushing them into South Shore, all right? Now, what you got now? You got turf wars because you got these youngsters who are not, they don't have the pillars, they don't have the foundation in these communities, and so they're trying to reconnect and reconfigure their world, and so this block is against this block, and that block is against that block, and that's why we have this upsurge in killing, because we don't have gangs no more. We got blocks fighting blocks, and they're all armed to the gill, and they're all ready to kill their neighbor from the next block, and that's what's going on in this city. And the fact is that we got to deal with that policy. It was the largest forced migration in the history of this country, and we got to speak to that and understand that. Now, the violence of that, the policy-directed violence of that, is followed just this year with the closing of one time of 54 schools. All right, so it's a war against our young people, and the adults is talking about, well, I ain't got a contract, Congressman. Let's focus on the real war, and that war is totally destroyed our sense of community here in Chicago, and we got to deal with that.
So, Congressman, I've gotten a bunch of questions, and Congresswoman, so you go back to Washington. You go back to work in August in Washington, and this was given me, what is the plan?
Next week.
Right? Quite simple, what is the plan? So when you go back to Washington, and we certainly understand and have compassion for the friction that you all feel when you go back to Washington, but what is the plan? When you go back, you heard from folks this evening, from today, you know the issue, you lived the issue for decades. What is the plan?
I think the plan is that we're going to take 3 or 4 very concrete initiatives and ideas that we will promote and try and convince as many other people to promote the very same ones. It is true that, we know what causes are. We know what problems are. We even know what solutions are. But what we're not able to do is to implement those things that can solve and will solve the problems. Early childhood education, everybody agrees, is a good thing. That every child should have optimal opportunity to get the very best education that they can get. I don't know anybody who disagrees with that. But making it happen, making it real, making it work becomes the challenge. Or there might be another issue. There are things that schools can do if we're talking specifically about the question of violence. There is anti-bullying legislation that has been introduced. As a matter of fact, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, as well as myself, have bills calling for curriculums to be developed that actually help teach young people that there is a way to resolve conflict without resorting to violence. That's part of the long road home. But you gotta take it, you gotta make use of it, and then we've got all of these other disparities that we know exist. As a matter of fact, we've been fighting them since Nat Turner, since Denmark Vesey, since Gabriel Prosser. I mean, we are aware, and not only are we aware, but the rest of society is aware. How do you generate the leverage that you need to bring about the change that you are seeking? Efforts are underway every day. Struggle is ongoing every day. And we meet with measures of success. Don't ever believe that no success ever comes, or that nothing ever changes, although much remains the same. And so the struggle goes on. We'll be struggling for years and years to reach the level of equality, equal justice, equal protection under the law. And there is no quick and dirty solutions. There are no easy answers. There are no panaceas. And so there's no point to delusion ourselves into believing that there is. Struggle, strife, and pain are the prerequisites for change. Always has been, always will be.
Well, I have probably close to 100 questions here, and I've read through most of them, and there are some amazing questions here. In the interest of time, and I know this Friday evening, I want to be respectful of your time, certainly. So what I'd ask the members of Congress, you have a question? Please, this is.
Can you hear me?
Here.
I just want to know from the audience, someone asked, what can we do? This was an emergency summit, and I really want to know the answer to when someone said, should we bring military to the blocks? What do people, I want to know what you think. You know, should we bring state police or, I'm not saying I'm for it one way or another, but I want to know what you think, because what I'm saying is people are afraid to sit on the porch or go to the store or send their kids to school. Then what is going to make you unafraid? Is it more visibility or what? That's what I want to know.
So can I ask a question, Congresswoman? In the interest of time, would you all commit to sticking around and talking to folks one-on-one afterwards for a little bit? Yes? Yeah. Congresswoman?
She has a good point.
Please.
Is my mic? Can you hear me? Yeah. Let me build on what my members have said. Again, let me indicate that your members are here. Congressional Black Caucus members are here. You saw many of them today. Some of us flew in late just so that we could be part of caring about what is happening to our young people. We have something called the Justice Working Group of the Congressional Black Caucus. Your members are a member of it. And my promise to you is that I said something about gun trafficking. We have talked around it in Washington. But there is something to all these guns being around, and it's not the ones you have in your home that no one is trying to break the Second Amendment. But the ease of getting guns is because you can't seem to get people to understand. So we have an agenda: universal background checks, banning these assault weapons, passing anti-bullying and prevention, meaning that there are resources to intervene, just like Second Chance worked, then giving people a second chance with a job. The list of gun laws that many of us have introduced, simple ones, and yes, dealing with some of the laws that did not work in Sanford, Florida, dealing with stand your ground, dealing with the self-defense that winds up people who want to not do right can use to avoid prosecution. But one thing we have to concede is that we're not getting killed with a fist. We're getting killed with guns in the wrong hands and bullets, and you have to ask yourself, where are all these coming from? So the Justice Working Group and the Congressional Black Caucus, we're hearing all of that, is going to ask the hard questions, produce legislation, and also seek the resources, because there is nothing wrong with asking, as Bobby has said, let children be our priority from the federal level that deals with education and summer jobs. And I will leave to the expert about how the gangs are moving around, whether it's turf, whether it's drugs, whether it's one gang against another, but we do know people are dying. And I think we need to leave here with the burden of the members who put together an omnibus, an emergency plan and funding, and I can tell you that no one up here is a wallflower, and that this will be heard next week loudly and clearly. And the good news is, let me say the good news. I like to say the good news. In our church, it's the good news coming. We've got some brilliant strategists coming out of the diverse community, the African diaspora, Latino community. We've got some brilliant folk, but they need to be heard. It's got to be we too are America. So when they come with their plan, whether it's organizations that my members work with and help fund, whether it's NAACP, whether it's the Urban League, guys, you have to know that whatever the national label, these folk are working hard. I'm not going to bring up the Voting Rights Act, but that's on our plate. And that's got to deal with how we have people who are representing that's going to be interested in giving monies to put our children first. So if you'll work with us to get an anti-violence agenda by your voices and working with your members, you can be assured the Congressional Black Caucus, all the members that came, are going to take this back to Washington. They're not going to talk to ourselves. We're going to talk to the idea of a heard, listened to, and acted upon agenda. You know what? The Great Society in the 1960s, that's old terminology. We're going to come up with something great that's going to deal with our children based upon what I know my members heard and what I'll take away. But don't forget, we came here about gun violence, and don't let anybody say that we didn't hear about what we need to do about preventing gun violence and saving the lives of our children. So I heard you, and I've got folk to work with, and I thank them for having me today.
Thank you. Congresswoman Kelly and Congressman Rush, do you want to leave us with some closing words?
Yeah, I would. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to just say to those who have been here, whatever time that you've been here, Sheila, I really thank you for coming here to Chicago for this, and Maxine and CORRINE and Cedric, they've come from their districts, and I know how tough it is to come into another city. So I really appreciate you for coming, and Maxine and others for coming. Danny and Robin, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work with them. And I love everyone here, those who were here and had to leave, those who came in later, those who participated in the in the breakouts. This has been a historic day, pretty remarkable day. Not only for the conversations inside the breakout sessions, but the conversations in the cafeteria, the conversations on the sidewalk, in the hallways, a lot of conversations going on around this particular issue. And when we as a community start having conversations about the problems, and we're well on our way to solving the problems. It's when we don't talk to each other, that's when the problems really become more magnified and more intense. And let me just leave you with two thoughts. One thought that I have is that I don't know how many of you here have volunteered to really spend any time working in your church, in your schools, on your block, in your organization, on these issues with these young people. The young people need the love and the support and the time of the adults. I often tell the story about young people who 2 years ago was in my office. They come in every year, but this one particular group, and they had been in Washington six days, and this was the end of their trip to Washington, and they came in to see their congressman, and I sat for 45 minutes, and they asking me questions about legislation and my position on legislation, and we went through that very nice, thoughtful conversation, great questions, and then at the end of it, I asked them, I said, now I've got 2 questions I want to ask you. I said, what is your biggest problem? These children who are from Hirsch High School and from Simeon and King and various other high schools, you know, broad cross section. I said, what is your biggest problem? This was right after Damien Alba was killed. They said, our biggest problem is fear. Fear is our biggest problem. Fear of being shot, fear of being stabbed, fear of being clubbed to death. Fear is our biggest problem. Going to school, from school, walking to the store, our biggest problem is fear. Stunned me that we have in our community, our children, our neighbors' children, our young people's major problem is fear. I said, okay, after I collected myself, well, what can we as adults do about it? They said, and give us some of your time. They didn't ask for more money. They didn't ask for grants. They didn't ask for laws to be passed. They didn't ask for President Obama to create a commission. They said, give us more of your time. If we would invest more of our time with these young people, we can stop this violence. Number one. The second thought that I had is how do we, this is a national movement. It's not just, Chicago is just the epicenter of it. It really is going across some of these, I don't know where these TV cameras are, but some people in Philadelphia are going to see and hear about this, read about this, and some people in Oakland, California are going to hear and read about this. And they're going to wonder, what are they doing in Chicago? How is Chicago working this situation out? One thing that I don't think that would take a lot of time and effort. We got 30 days before the National March on Washington, the day that it took place, August 28th, the 50th anniversary. We got 1 month. Today is the 27th? Yeah. So we got 1 month. 26. There's 26. Okay, we're 2 days, all right. Why, if you and I can agree on this, why don't we work over the next 30 days? Emailing, texting, and sending Facebook, communicating, and ask for a National Day of Nonviolence in our communities on August the 28th. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to solve the problem, but just the process of going through that will make a difference in some communities. If you organize your church around just that simple idea, one day, just that simple idea, organize your block, organize your school, get into these communities. One day, a National Day of Nonviolence, and let's declare it, and let's just make that happen. No killings on that day, call a ceasefire on that day, and if we do it then, I think that we'll be empowering ourselves to take more definitive action.
Thank you for that. Congressman Kelly, take us home.
Once again, I just want to appreciate all of you that have taken the time to come. We know we put this together in an emergency fashion and not a lot of notice, and I'm sure a lot of this is preaching
to the choir, but the choir needs reminding and practicing and rehearsing, but also we're asking the choir to get more singers because we need a community. We need a community to get involved, and it's an old proverb, but it is gonna take a village. It's gonna take us, and it's gonna take you who represent many different entities. But I just wanna say, thank you so much again, and I am passionate about this. Your zip code should not determine your opportunity, and I just want to make sure, as someone said, we had this meeting 10 years ago. Well, 10 years from now, I don't want us to be having this meeting. Thank you.
If I could,
the level of cooperation has been incredible. We've had the governor of our state. We've had the mayor of our city. We've had several local elected officials. We've had community groups and organizations. We've had faith leaders. And I want to thank all of those who have combined to make for a very productive weekend. I also want to thank all of our staffs and the staff of Chicago State University for their engagement, their involvement, their cooperation. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus staff, each one of our individual staffs here in Chicago and in Washington. And I believe that we have started again something that we've heard, commitment. Last night there was a commitment that people would continue to convene themselves here at Chicago State University, that there will be continuous discussion, continuous meetings, continuous organization, and quite frankly, it takes all of that in order to make something happen. It's been very productive. I know that people are going to ask, what happens as a result? Well, what happens as a result remains to be seen. And quite frankly, the answer to that really becomes a question that each one of us will answer. I never will forget growing up, a friend of mine and myself, we thought that we were fairly bright little boys. There was a man in our town named Uncle Joe, who was known as the wisest of men. The idea was that if we could ask Uncle Joe a question that he could not answer, then everybody would know that we were smart. And so we thought that we'd catch ourselves a mockingbird, and we'd ask Uncle Joe if he knew what we had. We figured that he would know we had a mockingbird. But then we would ask him if the bird was alive or dead. If Uncle Joe said that the bird was alive, we would squeeze it and kill it, open our hands, and everybody could see that he was wrong. If he said the bird was dead, we would simply open our hands and the bird would fly away. So we ran to him with our plan. We says, Uncle Joe, we want to ask you something. Do you know what we've got in our hand? So he looked and said, little boy, in your hand is a mockingbird. We kind of hunched each other and said, well, but we got him now. He said, well, Uncle Joe, can you tell us if the bird is alive or dead? Uncle Joe acted like he was about to answer. Then he looked at the two of us and he said, little boys, the answer to that is in your hands. The success of this weekend summit and its success is really in all of our hands as we leave based upon what we do. We thank you for coming.
Well, that is a beautiful way to end this inspiring evening. I have one piece of housekeeping here. These incredible people don't stop. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Kennedy King College, there is the Congressional Black Caucus presents the Health Brain Trust of Making Good Health My Reality. Congressman Bobby Rush, Congressman Danny Davis, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and Congresswoman Donna Christensen will all be there at 9 a.m., a town hall on health at Kennedy King College. I would say this, I want to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressman Bobby Rush, Congressman Danny Davis, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, Congresswoman Corinne Brown, who had to leave, for being here with us this evening, putting this together. But most importantly, as Congressman Davis said, I thank you all for being here. In the spirit of Congressman Rush and Mr. Davis's childhood story, on August 28th, he asked us, would we commit to a day of nonviolence in the city of Chicago and across this nation? And as Congresswoman Kelly said, sometimes we feel we're preaching to the choir. I think we know the answer to that question, but in that spirit and leading us in a celebration of positivity for the end of the evening, if you will commit to that day and to every day, would you please stand up? Well, let's have a safe evening this evening on Friday. God bless the city of Chicago, and God bless these United States of America. Thank you so much.